I called my husband in a hurry, but he didn't answer. I was afraid that I would be reported as a suspicious person if I stayed there, so I took my daughter and went back to my mother's house. After bombarding my husband with phone calls, he finally answered.
What? You're so persistent.
What's going on? There was a stranger living in our house.
Well, I sold that house.
I was shocked and asked him. What are you doing? That's so selfish.
It's your fault. You neglected your job as a wife, which is housework. So we got divorced 3 months ago and sold the house. I received the proceeds from the sale as compensation.
Hello, my name is Jessica, and I'm a 34-year-old housewife living with my husband Michael and our 5-year-old daughter Sophia. We built our own home after Sophia was born, and while we have some happy moments, there are also times when things are difficult. My husband has a tendency to be controlling and selfish, and he thinks he can make me do whatever he wants. When he comes home from work, he immediately asks,
What's for dinner?
And even after he's finished eating, he doesn't put his dishes away or wash them. He takes a bath, drinks alcohol, eats snacks, and leaves his dishes on the table. When I point out his behavior, he gets angry and says things like,
Who do you think is supporting your life? Don't complain when you don't work.
Even though I work too and contribute to our household, this is too much. Moreover, my husband is not helpful when it comes to raising our daughter. When Sophia was born, he was thrilled and said things like,
She looks just like me.
But now he doesn't pay attention to her and tells her to play with me when she asks him to play. She gets sad every time and eventually stopped asking him to play altogether. I wonder if we're really happy. I've been sighing a lot lately. I wonder why I keep cooking for such an unreasonable person. Am I going to live my life like a housekeeper? While I was thinking about such things while cooking, the landline phone rang suddenly. I couldn't answer it right away because I was cooking.
Hey, what are you doing? Hurry up and answer it.
If we argued here, the phone would be disconnected. I hurriedly washed my dirty hands and answered the phone. It's Saturday night now. Who could it be at this time? I was surprised when the person on the other end of the phone introduced himself as a doctor. Then the doctor said something that surprised me even more.
Your mother has collapsed and has been taken to the hospital. Can you come right away?
I almost dropped the receiver. My mother suddenly collapsed. My head went blank at the sudden event. Since I got married, the number of times I visited my mother had decreased. My father had already passed away, and I wanted to increase the number of visits after that, but since my daughter was born, I couldn't visit my mother's house frequently. I've received a lot of love from my mother and I still want to repay her. I don't want this to be our last goodbye. According to the doctor, the cause of her collapse was a myocardial infarction. When she was brought in, it was critical, but now her condition is stable for the time being. I breathed a sigh of relief when I heard that. She's going to be hospitalized for tests and such from now on. I'll go right away. I hung up the phone. I'm an only child, and my father has passed away, so my mother only has me. As soon as I hung up the phone, I got ready to go out. When I told my husband, Sorry, my mother seems to have collapsed, so I'm going to the hospital.
What? What about my dinner?
I was amazed. Is his dinner more important than his wife's mother collapsing? Normally it would be nice if he could say something like, Should I worry and take the car out? That's not the point. You should know that much. When I raised my voice, my husband was surprised for a moment, but then he started to get angry.
What's with that attitude?
I thought it was a waste of time to talk to him anymore, so I had my daughter get ready to go out and got in the car. My husband was still yelling, but I ignored him and went to the hospital. My mother was sleeping on the bed. I spoke to the doctor, and it seems that my mother will be hospitalized for tests. We'll talk more after the results come out. It seems that she hit her body in various places when she collapsed, so it is needed to examine her carefully to see how it's affecting her internally. I'm very worried. I hope she doesn't pass away like this. But the doctor seemed to sense my anxiety and said,
Don't worry, she's just sleeping now because her condition is stable.
Finally, the doctor told me about future plans, and I went home with my daughter. Then I saw beer cans and a pizza box on the table, which made me feel disgusted. My husband was sleeping on the sofa with the TV on. I thought about waking him up, but I was already exhausted both mentally and physically from my mother's situation, so I decided not to. I was grateful that he was sleeping there. I cleaned up the trash on the table, turned off the TV and the lights, and suggested to my daughter that we go out to eat at a casual dining restaurant. She was enjoying her kids' meal. While I was eating my own order, I was thinking about the future. I wonder if my mother is okay. Although she didn't have any life-threatening conditions this time, there's still a chance that something similar could happen again. I wonder if it's okay that I don't live nearby. But even if I suggest living with my mother to my husband, he'll definitely reject it. Still, I need to assert my own will for my mother, who is the only one related to me by blood. The next day, I mustered up the courage to talk to my husband. I told him that my mother is currently hospitalized for tests, and depending on the results, I want to live with her within my reach. Then my husband immediately replied,
That's absolutely not going to happen.
I expected it, but I didn't think he would reject it so quickly. Why not?
This is my house. I won't let it become an uncomfortable place for me.
That's terrible. I'm not talking about normal cohabitation. I'm saying that I want to live with her in case she needs care. Besides, this is my house too.
What's not allowed is not allowed. I'm the one who works and pays for our living expenses, so I have the right to make decisions.
I never thought my husband was such a selfish man who didn't understand anything. He might be the one paying for our living expenses, but I'm the one who takes care of everything in this house. I felt more distrustful of my husband than ever before. A few days later, I went to the hospital to get the results of the test. It turned out that my mother had hurt her back and would need care after being discharged from the hospital. I was in a bind because my husband had just told me that living together was absolutely out of the question. What should I do if I need to take care of my mother in the future? At that moment,
I'm sorry for causing you trouble.
My mother said with a sad expression. Seeing my mother like that, I realized that she was the one I needed to cherish. My husband's opinion and such things don't matter now. Don't worry, Mom. Everything will be fine, I said, holding her hand. I vowed to do whatever I could for my mother. After that, I told my husband several times that my mother needed care and I wanted to live with her to take care of her, but he rejected it every time. I'll go back to my mother's house for a while to take care of my mother. My husband got angry.
You should have done that from the beginning. Don't make things complicated.
I was really angry, but I got permission to go back to my mother's house, so I went there with my daughter after my mother was discharged from the hospital. When I went to pick up my mother at the hospital, she was in a wheelchair and looked very sad.
I'm sorry for causing you trouble like this.
She is a responsible person and probably doesn't want to cause trouble for others. But I am her daughter. I don't want her to hold back. It's okay. Let's have fun with just the three of us from now on, I said, holding her hand. And so, my mother's care began at my mother's house. When I entered the house, my mother tried to make tea for me, but I stopped her in a hurry. Mom, don't try to do everything yourself. You can rely on me from now on.
I'm sorry, thank you.
My mother said, looking a little sad again. Then my daughter said cheerfully, I'll prepare it. My mother and I were both relieved, and in the end, the three of us prepared tea together and ate sweets. We had a peaceful and enjoyable time like that, but that night, my husband called me out of the blue. Hello? Is something wrong?
Hey! Where the hell are you wandering around?
Huh? I was surprised. What was my husband talking about? Didn't I say I'm going to start taking care of my mother at my mother's house today? Then my husband said something outrageous.
What? You're staying overnight? I didn't hear anything about that. What about my food? Laundry? Bath? Come back here right now.
Unbelievable. Does he think I'm a housekeeper or something? I said I'm going back to my mother's house for a while. You're a grown man, you can do the housework by yourself.
Don't mess with me. Come back soon. I didn't give you permission to stay overnight.
It's impossible to take care of my mother without staying overnight. It takes 3 hours by car from my mother's house to our house. Anyway, Sophia and I will live at my mother's house for a while. I said that and hung up the phone. I was really fed up with my husband. And so, my life of taking care of my mother began. My mother couldn't bathe herself, so I washed her body while taking a bath together. I cooked the dishes that my mother always made for me when I was a child. At first, I wasn't used to it, but I was happy to live with my mother again after a long time. My daughter also seems happy to spend time with her grandmother. Although my mother can't play with her, she listens to my daughter's stories and my daughter is very fond of her. After a while, there was no contact from my husband since that day. I was surprised, but it was a relief that he didn't contact me, so I didn't contact him either. One day, about 3 months after that, my mother's condition worsened. I took her to the hospital in a hurry. According to the doctor's diagnosis, her back was quite bad and her leg muscles were also weakening. I was told that she needed to switch to a hospitalization lifestyle, so I requested it. I want my mother's condition to improve as much as possible. I immediately completed the hospitalization procedures and brought my mother's change of clothes from home. I'll come to visit you every day. After telling my mother, I went home with my daughter for the first time in a while. However, as soon as I arrived home, I felt a strange sense of discomfort. First, there was an unfamiliar car parked in front of the house. My husband bought a new car while I was taking care of my mother. I was fed up with him. I was going to complain about it, but when I tried to unlock the door with my key, it wouldn't turn. What's going on? No matter how many times I tried, the key wouldn't work. Is this not my house? I looked at the exterior of the house in a hurry, but it was definitely the house that my husband and I built. But I was surprised when I looked at the nameplate. The name of a complete stranger was written on it. I was at a loss for words. It had been 3 months since I started living with my mother to take care of her. Did my husband sell our house during that time? I called my husband in a hurry, but he didn't answer. For the time being, I went back to my mother's house with my daughter because I was afraid of being reported as a suspicious person if I stayed there. And then I called my husband over and over again until he finally answered the phone.
What's up? You're so persistent.
What's going on? A stranger was living in our house.
Well, I sold the house.
What? How dare you do something like that?
It's your fault. You neglected your job as a wife and housekeeper. So we got divorced 3 months ago and sold the house. I'll take the money from the sale as compensation.
What? I couldn't understand what my husband was saying. What is he talking about? Wait a minute. What do you mean we got divorced?
I already filed for divorce. You and I are strangers now. Don't ever contact me again.
He said, and hung up the phone. I panicked. What happened? I didn't sign any divorce papers, but how can we get divorced? First, take a deep breath and calm down. falsifying a divorce document is a crime, isn't it? I hurried to a lawyer's office and consulted with them. As expected, it is considered a crime. I explained the situation and asked the lawyer for help. I thought it was suspicious that my husband would do something like this without my knowledge, so I decided to investigate that point as well. I requested an investigation from a private detective agency using my savings from my time as a company employee. After about a week, evidence of my husband's affair came to light. It seems that my husband thought he could divorce me and was meeting his mistress openly. I sent a certified letter to my husband's workplace demanding a divorce and compensation for damages, including evidence of his affair. I also accused him of forging the divorce papers. Then, my husband contacted me immediately.
Hey! What's the meaning of this? Don't send weird stuff to my company.
It's not weird, it's an official document. Unlike the one you forged.
Forge. I filled out the divorce papers using your signature, so there's no problem, right? That means we're divorced and I'm not cheating.
I was dumbfounded. If that's what you want to believe, then go ahead. But I'll still demand compensation from you and your mistress, and I've reported the forgery to the police.
What? The police?
Of course, I'll also demand child support from you. From now on, let's communicate through our lawyers. Saying that, I hung up the phone. My husband must be quite shaken up. And it seems he was arrested for forging the divorce papers. Naturally, he lost his job. He had to pay a fine when he was arrested. He lost all his money due to the compensation and child support he had to pay to me. Furthermore, I demanded a division of property through my lawyer. As a result, I was able to receive half the money from selling our house. When we bought that house, I contributed a considerable amount from my savings, so it's strange that I'm not getting that much money back. After the divorce, we were able to settle things peacefully. Fortunately, my daughter and I had my mother's house to stay in, and she allowed us to live there. We frequently visited my mother and spent time together as a family. About a month after the divorce, my ex-husband suddenly showed up at my mother's house. He looked disheveled and unclean. When he saw me, he broke down in tears and begged for forgiveness while prostrating himself on the ground.
I'm sorry. It was all my fault. Please forgive me and let's start over again.
I was surprised, and my ex-husband began to tell me what had happened since the divorce. He said he had become penniless and had worked as a day laborer to make ends meet. However, all his wages had been taken by his mistress. He was unable to pay his rent and had accumulated a lot of debt just to keep his home. He was struggling to make ends meet and his debt was increasing day by day.
Please, I'll break up with my girlfriend. Let's start over again. You do the housework and I'll earn money.
The sight of my ex-husband's downfall was quite satisfying, but I didn't want him to come here. How are you going to support us in your current state? Well, I won't take you back even if you pay me. Just leave now. We're officially divorced, so don't come here again. If you do, I'll call the police. My ex-husband was frightened by the word police.
I don't want to get arrested anymore.
Saying that, my ex-husband ran away in a hurry. I didn't think he would come back again, but I was able to find a new job, so I decided to move to an apartment near the hospital where my mother was hospitalized. I now live in a new and clean apartment with my daughter and spend happy days visiting my mother.
It's unthinkable to sell a house without permission, and it's crazy to forge divorce papers. I'm glad she was able to break up with such a dangerous man. I think it's tough for her to work while taking care of her mother's illness and raising her child, but I hope she'll do her best. How was this story? Please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.